but we were in no shape to be going into battle again.
We were told we were going in, but I guess some brighter minds prevailed and they decided it was a lost cause.
One Canpara's role in the liberation of Rochefort has been recognized with a monument in the Belgian city. For 3 months, almost to the day, the Canadian paratroopers fought across France to expand the D-Day beachhead. On September 7th, the battalion returned to England to study its successes and failures, to rest, refit, recuperate, and to train with reinforcements for another brutally challenging battle. The emphasis was on weapons handling, physical fitness, rapid clearance of drop zones, and brutally efficient offensive and defensive combat skills. They were prepared essentially for no-holds-barred street fighting. They needed those skills, for the tide of war had changed. The Germans launched a powerful counterattack, the von Rundstedt offensive. Then, as 1944 came to an end, the Canadian Parachute Battalion were sent back to the front to aid U.S. and British units in pushing the Axis forces out of Belgium and the Ardennes, in what would come to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. The battalion went into action in the Ardennes on Christmas Day, 1944.
Our next operation was when the Battle of Bulge started on December the 16th.
The von Rundstedt's armor had broken through between the Americans and the British forces that were in the area at the time, and were heading for Ostend.
The Germans have made it clear that once they have breached with their armor the lines in the Ardennes, their hope is to be in Paris and the Channel ports by New Year.
The weather was so bad as far as flying was concerned that all aircraft had been grounded, so that there was no air support for any of the troops that were there.
So it was pretty frightening.
6th Airborne Division were given instructions to head for the Ardennes. The commanding officer didn't know what the ultimate objective would be, so there was a bit of a confusion as to what clothing to take.
They'd never experienced a winter like that from what we hear. We can't understand why it had particularly that time to have that kind of weather.
As it was, we had no winter underwear, we had no gloves, we had no scarves, we had no balaclavas or things like that would keep us semi-warm during a miserable winter. As a consequence, we went to the Ardennes in the same clothing we had been issued for the operation in Normandy.
The Met people, meteorological people, and the Air Force have said they can't fly. The Ardennes is closed in with fog and snow. The visibility is terribly poor. There can't be a parachute drop. Therefore, as quickly as possible, we are changing our method, and we are going by sea. On Christmas Eve, the 24th of December, we went by sea. The only time we went across the channel by sea.
We arrived in Belgium, and then we were trucked to the front where the battles were going on.
We were in the front line for the first time and on Christmas Day, and held that line.
Many of the American troops were wandering about trying to find their own units that had been badly dispersed. Some fell in with us, some fell in with other units in the brigade.
Cold weather was a real problem because we weren't dressed for winter weather.
And very few of us had additional warm clothing.
And hobnail boots bring in the frost and freeze the feet very quickly, so that was unpleasant.
So it was a tense time and perishing cold.
And you couldn't dig any slit trenches in the frozen ground, so a shell will hit the ground, they just send the splinters farther and faster.
Some of us sleeping outside for for weeks in the cold, and nothing really happened to most of these people. It's amazing.
The first couple of weeks was about as miserable as life could get.
In my opinion, we had it easy because the Germans had just about exhausted their effort. Though the battalion right next door to us, they lost 65 men killed in one day, but are 4 miles away from us, and yet ourselves we had very few casualties. The 13th Battalion, which was beside us, they happened to be on one of the main roads, a place called Buer, where a German column, armored column, came on. Well, the airborne are lightly armored, and they only have handguns and mortars. They don't have much in the way to stop tanks.
We didn't have a contact with the Americans, but we were aware that to our right or south of us in the Ardennes, on that line facing von Rundstedt and the German armor, was the 101st American Airborne.
Well, the 101st were pretty well surrounded. They held, most of the German effort was going around trying to capture Bastogne.
They courageously held that particular town against all odds, did a fine job of it, and we were within about, I would say, 15 kilometers when some of us suggested that perhaps we should go in and see if we could help them out. After all, some of their battalions had men that were known to some of our men. However, we were turned down by the Americans because they wanted an American unit to come in to break into the perimeter around Bastogne and do the rescue work.
They took a bad shellacking. Anyway, they actually stopped the German column, who got discouraged and backed away.
It is not a highlight of combat and pitched battles in my memory, but one of having to live through pretty severe hardship from weather, and always the constant threat that you could be overrun. But later on, within 2 weeks, once the line was established and we went on the attack, and General Patton, an American Third Army coming from the south, relieving the 101st, went on the attack, that took a lot of pressure off.
The success of the battalion in achieving its objectives in Robon is commemorated with a monument in that town. The 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion was the only Canadian combat unit to see action in the Ardennes. The Allied troops, many improperly kitted with full winter gear, endured and survived the coldest, snowiest weather in memory in the Ardennes forest on Belgium's border with Germany. Over 1 million men fought in the Battle of the Bulge, 500,000 Germans, 600,000 Americans, more than fought at Gettysburg, and 55,000 British, including the Canadians, Free French, and Belgian units. 800 tanks were lost on each side. 1,000 German aircraft were destroyed, 100,000 Germans killed, wounded, or captured. There were 81,000 American casualties, 19,000 of these died in the fighting, and 1,400 British and Canadian casualties, 200 killed. British Field Marshal Montgomery said the Battle of the Ardennes was definitely one of the most difficult in which he'd ever participated.
We had a good spirit in the battalion. We figured we could do anything.
They were thinking about what they had to do. They were thinking about that much more than worrying about themselves.
Most people don't really, I don't think, feel that anything's going to happen to them.
Everybody experiences fear.
Some fellows had a little difficulty with it.
I just felt that I would survive the war, that's all.
I wasn't particularly concerned or worried.
They were all gung-ho.
The guys were all hepped up for these operations.
And from that point on, the German